In a busy night in the NHL, we had a playoff preview of the Avalanche and the Jets, which went to overtime. We had a very, very brutal loss for the Boston Bruins in New Jersey against the Devils. And the Columbus Blue Jackets keep impressing with a big win over the Leafs, all on today's edition of Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On NHL. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That's my good friend and my co-host, Hunter Hodies. He's the co-host of Locked On Penguins. We want to thank everyone who's making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So, my good friend Hunter, how we doing, brother? Lots to get to today. Let's get on into it. That Jets-Avs game, that was great hockey. Back and forth,
real hoops.
Lots of chances, great defense, good goaltending. That was playoff hockey last night.
I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Nick, but I'm sorry. That was real hoops, my
Yeah.
friend. Or honestly, well, this is a hockey podcast. Real puck, my friend. That was awesome to watch. And I know they played in the playoffs last year. The Avs kicked the Jets' butts in that series. I have a feeling this year, if these two teams play again, that series is going to be a lot closer as long as Connor Hellebuyck does not stink up the joint with the way he played in that series. But that game was awesome. Back and forth, high-end talent galore, just both teams trading haymakers. And Winnipeg wins it early in overtime. Hell of a celebration, by the way. Sign me up for 7 games of that in the playoffs, man. Please.
That's all we really ask for as hockey people. We're going to get to our experts from Locked On Avs and Locked On Jets in a second here, but that's all I ask for. Give me at least 2 really good first round series and let's see some big dogs go at it. You know, that's one of the drawbacks of this format is that this could very well be a first round playoff matchup when this probably should be a second or a third round series. But as long as we get at least 1 or 2, that's really all I ever ask for from the first round. So we'll throw it to Locked On Jets first, and then we'll come back and assess.
Harrison from Locked On Winnipeg Jets here, live right after a big game against the Colorado Avalanche. The Winnipeg Jets have won 3-2 in overtime. Wasn't a perfect game. The top line struggled. There were turnovers galore, and the defense was stretched to its absolute limits, all while missing captain Adam Lowry, but it didn't end up mattering. The Jets came away with some big contributions from their depth lines, including David Gustafsson and Morgan Barron, and the second line with Vilardi, Ehlers, and Nemesnikov. All of it, forced the Avs into some really tough spots. Winnipeg was able to score a couple of very good goals, and at the end of it, Winnipeg put together a very gritty performance after Scott Arniero called them out for a very bad game against Utah. The Jets answered. Neil Pionk ended it in overtime, and just like that, the Jets have come away with another 2 points against Colorado. Hopefully, a sign of things to come before the playoffs.
That was very fun hockey. The thing that's impressed me a lot about the Jets is they're not even making great lineup decisions and they're still winning. Like, why was Logan Stanley playing on his offside last night against Colorado when you have better defense? The Logan Stanley experiment has mystified me basically the entirety of his duration of NHL time because I just don't see it. The mobility and the puck skills are not there. I understand the size, but at a certain point, size becomes a functionality issue. If you're too big, you can't react well enough. And still, Vilardi has been great for them. He's been, I won't say a revelation because that's a bit of a strong word, but that PLD trade worked out really well for them. They deepened their lineup. It gave them the ability to roll a bit more of a balanced lineup. No Adam Lowry last night, and that didn't really matter a whole lot for them. Josh Morrissey is having a fringe, I would say, Norris caliber season. I think he's been one of the better defensemen in the league, and there's something about that intensity, man. Every few weeks you get one of these games in the regular season that feels like a playoff game. The Oilers and Golden Knights played one of these about 3 weeks ago, where it was 1-0, and that was the final score, where there was just no room. This game, it was 20-something shots on goal midway through the third period for both teams. There wasn't a lot of room. It was really fast. It was really high tempo, and it's really a good showcase of what high-level hockey is in today's game.
Yeah, I mean, in Winnipeg, they like to play that type of game.
Yeah.
They've liked to play that type of game for these last few years, just because that's the way they've been coached. Even before Scotty Arniel took over, this is the way that Winnipeg likes to play. These 2-1, 3-2 games. Once you try to get them in a track meet, 5-4, 6-5 game, they get a little bit uncomfortable just because they don't have as many horses as some of these other teams, like a Colorado when the Avalanche are fully healthy. So this type of game last night, this works to Winnipeg's advantage. When I look at Winnipeg's lineup, Nick, I think they're another forward or two short potentially heading into the deadline. I think if they can maybe get another center to really deepen that lineup, I think that could go a long way. No, it's not going to be cheap, especially around the trade deadline where sellers are asking for the sun and the moon. But I think if they can get another center to really deepen that lineup, it's going to make them that much better heading in the playoffs because, Kyle Connor, he's been great this year when he's healthy. Ehlers has been the same. Iafalo's been fun. Mark Scheifele's been a lot of fun this year. Niederreiter's been a really good fit on the third line. I like Cole Perfetti's game as well, the way that he's been able to develop when he gets the ice time. But again, they can deepen that lineup just a little bit. I think that's going to go a long way for them.
All right, so we're going to throw it to Locked On Avs, and then we'll wrap up this conversation.
All right, so the Colorado Avalanche and Winnipeg Jets skate to overtime, and before you can even blink, Kyle, Neil Pionka, of all people, rifles one past Mackenzie Blackwood, and that's all she wrote. So a really good game, a really entertaining game, and this is one of those games where you're like, yeah, I'd like to see 7 games of that in a playoff series.
Yeah, this felt like a heavyweight fight. You had gutsy goals by Nathan MacKinnon and Cale Makar. It took 17 seconds of overtime to put this one away, but this was an entertaining game from start to finish.
I liked the battle that you saw from the Avalanche. They got down, they came back, and they were able to solve Connor Hellebuck, which they have not been able to do in the last 3 regular season games. They had a really good series against him in the playoffs, but as far as regular season goes, he had 3 straight shutouts against him, and they finally solved him to the tune of 2 goals, which is great. But you gave up the third, and you get the point. I guess you're happy about that. Maybe not super happy because it is a division game. You wanted the 2 in regulation, but now you recuperate, and now you head out east for 3 games, which the Avs, we've seen them do this in the past, man, where they will rally around. It's only a 3-game road trip, but it is on the East Coast, so you get away from home for a little bit, and we've seen them kind of rally and kind of turn things around on the road.
Yeah, and with his performance against Winnipeg, you like where the Avalanche are sitting and where the power is coming from on the offense. You just want to see them on the road on this East Coast trip find their power play because it's not existent right now.
I was going to say, you mentioned that word power, and it's not going well for the Avalanche. They need to fix that power play. So, that's how this thing wound up. Tune into Locked On Avalanche, where Kyle and I will break this entire thing down.
And to your point, I want to wrap up on what you brought up because I think it's an interesting idea. The West is definitely significantly better than the East. I think the East is Florida and everybody else, and even Florida hasn't been great this year. In the West, there are a lot of teams capable of winning the whole conference. Colorado, if they're able to make an addition or two, among them Edmonton, Vegas, Minnesota, Winnipeg, Dallas, that's a good 6 or 7 teams that all have the capacity to win the 3 series. And it's an interesting thought if you're sitting there as Chris McFarland, as the general manager of the Avalanche, of how much more of this do I want to burn off to try for our future right now when we're probably the 4th or 5th of that group and we're shallow. We're riding a goalie who's had a really nice start, but has never played in a playoff game before, which is something to think about. You're playing a lot of minutes. You're relying on your top dogs for a lot of minutes. You don't know when Nichushkin is going to come back. He was out of the lineup. You don't know if you're ever going to get Gabriel Landeskog back. They definitely feel a forward or 2 short, if not 3. And it's going to be a very volatile trade deadline, especially in the West for that reason. There are some teams who are going to say, well, the West is really difficult. I don't feel great about burning futures for this year. And then you'll have some teams that say, it's anyone's game. Let's go for this because we can do this. It's going to be a really interesting conversation to watch develop.
Yeah, that's why I think you might see a little bit of an arms race in the West. Some of these Western teams going to try to really take advantage of let's face it, Nick, a very weak Eastern Conference this year. I think with a lot of the teams that are still in it right now, you're not seeing a lot of movement, but let's see how February is for some of these teams, Nick, because I feel like once some of these teams potentially really fall out of the race, they're going to start, I think, calling some of these Western Conference teams that are really up there in the standings, being like, hey, we have these players available. Are you interested? Like, this is our price for them, all that stuff. And I think that's when you'll start to see some more trades, around the deadline in February. Usually, I feel like we get one big one in January, one or two big ones. We haven't gotten that just yet, but it's because the Eastern Conference, it's so weak. But again, so many of these teams still feel like they're in it. But with Colorado, I agree that, like Winnipeg, I think they're a forward or two short. If you're asking me, and this is strictly my opinion, I still think Colorado should try to make a go at it because you have Nathan MacKinnon in his prime. I understand, they don't know if they're getting Landeskog back. We'll have to see about Nichushkin at some point. He's going to come back at some point, but we'll just have to see when that is. But I think you owe it to MacKinnon, you owe it to Rantanen, Makar, Devon Taves to try and go for it every year that you have them, and not only have them, but that they're in their primes. MacKinnon, he's playing lights out once again this year. Rantanen, they haven't really extended him yet, Nick. I expect that to get done, but it is weird that there really hasn't been, it feels like, a lot of discussions between the two sides. I think he's still going to get paid, but it is a little bit weird that they haven't really come close to that extension just yet. But I still feel like the Avs should try to make a go at this. Chris McFarland, I think he's one of the best general managers in the league. I think with how creative he and Joe Sakic are in the front office, they have a means of really getting stuff done here and being creative and getting players to fit under the salary cap with retention, and all that other stuff. So I think they're still going to make a move or two here, in my opinion.
We're going to take our first break of today's show. And when we come back, we're going to talk about two teams trending in opposite directions in the Bruins and the Devils. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On NHL, so be sure to stick around. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. It's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keep every game exciting. This week, you know the deal, folks. Championship weekend in the NFL. I-95 showdown, the Commanders, Jaden Daniels, likely offensive rookie of the year, heading up to Philly to take on the Eagles, where the Eagles are 6.5-point favorites. Most difficult environment to play in the NFL. I'm genuinely worried for what's going to happen in that game, lest we recall what happened to the Vikings in the NFC title game a couple of years ago. And then the main event, heavyweight fight, Allen, Mahomes. They've played in the playoffs 3 times already. Mahomes has won the 3 previous times in the postseason. The Chiefs, 1.5-point favorites, looking to get to their 3rd straight Super Bowl. All of that over on FanDuel. So be sure to visit FanDuel.com or download the app and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Hunter and I on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL, where the Bruins and Devils are going in opposite directions. It's been a number of years, and our Ian of Locked On Bruins says it in his video. I'm going to steal a little bit of his thunder here, but it's been a while since the Bruins have been this bad. They just do not have the guys. And they have a few nice individual pieces. Pasta's still a top 20 player in the league. Swayman is a top 10 goalie in the league. McAvoy's a top 10 defenseman in the league. But once you get past that, the depth is just, it's not there. They signed Elias Lindholm to be a first-line center, and he's played like a third-line center. They signed Nikita Zadorov, who's probably more of a 4th or 5th defenseman, and he's been playing on the first pair a lot this year. Zadorov leads the entire league in penalty minutes amongst defensemen. It's been a real struggle for them. So we'll throw it to Trey of Locked On Devils first. We'll come back. We'll hit the Devils side of things. Then we'll go to Ian and hit the Bruins side of things. Right now.
I'm back from the Prudential Center, where the New Jersey Devils dominated the Boston Bruins by a score of 5-1 on the same night that Jacques Lemaire was inducted into the Devils Ring of Honor. Now, I know the Bruins haven't had their best season so far, but they've handled the Devils in their previous 10 meetings, having a winning record of 8-0-2. And the past 11 games coming into this particular matchup for the Devils, it had been a rough go at it. They had a record of 2-6-3. So something was going to have to change. And boy, did Sheldon Keefe shake up the lineup, and it worked to his benefit. Dawson Mercer walked away with 2 goals. Timo Meyer had a multi-point outing. Nico Hischier, he also had a multi-point outing. It was a great offensive showing for the Devils, who had been struggling to generate offense in their prior few games. Unfortunately, this game didn't go completely unscathed. Jacob Markstrom took a bit of a nasty hit from Justin Brazeau. Nothing egregious. Unfortunately, just a freak accident. But as a result, Markstrom had to exit the game. He didn't really put much pressure on his left leg. In comes Jake Allen, and he was really good in between the pipes. Hopefully, this is a turning point for the Devils, who once again have been having a rough showing the past few outings, but getting a big win against Boston, I think that's going to build some confidence.
So when we talk about the Devils coming into the year, you were a lot more optimistic on them than I was, because you felt the high-end talent was there and that would get them a seat at the table at the very least. And my entire reservation was, I just wanted to see them put it together, because 2 years ago, they have the best season they've had in like 15 years. Jack Hughes is a Hart Trophy caliber player. They get the slightly above average goaltending. They beat the Rangers in the first round. And then last year, you have another year where injuries derail your season. You play like 7 different goalies. Dougie Hamilton misses 5 months, almost your entire season. Nico Hischier deals with nagging lower body injuries. And look, the Devils definitely need to make an addition. We've heard them mentioned as a landing spot potentially for JT Miller. Whether or not that's a means of trying to drive up the price for the Rangers or the Hurricanes, can't know that without being in the room, but they are making progress. They definitely have work to do as far as getting their offense a little more consistent. The lines were in a blender last night. It was weird to see Paul Cotter playing with Jack Hughes, but they're trying at least. And the big thing for me with them is they're playing a lot better defense. You know, some of that is personnel where they've overturned 3 of the 6 guys from last year. And some of that is Sheldon Keefe. You know, they aren't being as aggressive offensively in the means of playing better defense. And eventually you're probably going to have to concede a little more defense to create more offense, but they're making progress.
You know, there was a stretch earlier this season, Nick, where they were holding a lot of teams under 20 shots per game. Like, they've been playing very stingy in their own zone all year. And a lot of that credit has to go to Sheldon Keefe. You know, under Lindy Ruff, they weren't playing that stingy defensively, but every player on this team has bought into what Sheldon Keefe is bringing to the table. And you've seen that on display. You know, their high-end talent this year has also been great. I still feel like this team can beat almost anyone in the playoffs in this conference. I think if you were to take them against Washington, for example, as 7-game series, most people probably say it's a coin flip. When healthy, though, I would probably lean towards the Devils, especially with how their high-end forwards are playing. The goaltending they've gotten this year, though, we'll have to see how severe the Markstrom injury is, Nick, because he's had a really good year for them. Like, he's been fantastic. He has been the answer that they've needed in net for the last several years. If he's out for a bit, I could see them potentially going into the goalie market and seeing if they can get another goalie to potentially pair with Jake Allen until Markstrom is ready to come back. I don't think it's going to be someone, you know, big, anything like that, like a John Gibson trade. I think that's more Carolina territory, in my opinion, but maybe a backup that becomes available on a team that's selling or something like that. I could see the Devils going after if the Markstrom injury is serious. But again, when New Jersey puts it all together, that's a scary team, especially with the high-end talent they have, the way they play in their own zone, the way Markstrom has played. They're going to be a very tough out in the playoffs.
We're going to throw it to Ian real quick for the Bruins perspective now.
For the first time in quite a while, it appears as though the Boston Bruins just aren't that good. This is Ian McLaren, host of Locked On Boston Bruins, and following a 5-1 loss to New Jersey here on Wednesday, the Bruins now have the second worst goal differential in the Eastern Conference. They're 6th in the Atlantic Division and have a number of teams that they'll have to jump in order to qualify for a playoff spot. And it looks more and more like they will be sellers at the trade deadline. The problem with that is that Don Sweeney, who would be taking those calls, just signed 2 key free agents to long-term contracts. They're already looking like albatross-type deals in Nikita Zadorov and Elias Lindholm. The Bruins, falling fast here in the Eastern Conference, and the outlook isn't great, despite the fact that they have some core players to build around.
The Bruins are going to be in a weird spot. I don't really see the avenue for a sell-off here. I mean, hypothetically, you probably get a lot for Brad Marchand. I don't think they would trade him, but he is a pending free agent, and teams would value his experience, his style of play. The Bruins absolutely could do a little bit of shenanigans here and trade him and tell him come back in the summer and say, we need picks. We need to rebuild our team. You'll come back in 3 months. We're not going to name an interim captain, but they're up the creek, man. They don't have a path here.
They don't have the guys that you said it earlier. And I also think
that reminds me. They are playing Vinny Lettieri, who has 300 career AHL games in their top 6 right now.
Yes.
They are beyond cooked from a depth perspective.
No, I agree. And I think this goes to show, once again, Don Sweeney has not done a good job lately with the Bruins. I mean, this summer, you trade Linus Ullmark, which, okay, I get because you want to make Swayman your number one, but you don't have a capable backup behind him. And Swayman, when he's on, yeah, he's a top 10 goalie in the league, but Nick, he's only an 896 goalie this year. He has really struggled. And I do think part of that is because he missed basically all of camp. He missed getting those reps. And then you have his backup, Jonas Korpisalo. He's 891 with a 2.88 goals against average. It's actually, his goals against average is actually a bit lower compared to Swayman, but his save percentage is a bit lower. But again, I still don't think he's a fully capable backup to a top 10 goaltender in this league when he is on. But you look at that Lindholm contract that you brought up. A lot of term, a lot of money, but you didn't get him to be your third line center. You got him to be your top line center, but he hasn't lived up to that contract. Zadorov, they signed him to really play in that top 4, but he's not a top pairing defenseman at this stage of his career. I think at best, he's a second pair guy, but he's not a top pairing guy. And that contract is also looking pretty poor. And you're right. You look up and down this lineup, Nick, Vinny Lettieri, they took a chance on Oliver Wahlstrom, who they got John Beecher, Justin Brazeau, Max Jones. They are in dire need of help at forward, man. And right now you look at the standings, they are tied for that final wildcard spot, but the Senators and the Canadiens have 2 games in hand on the Bruins. So if they were to win both of those games, they would be 4 points up on the Bruins, because the Bruins have played 49 games. Ottawa and Montreal, they played 47. I don't know who you're going to sell off this team at the deadline. I mean, you're not going to move Marchand. I really don't think they're going to do that. You're not going to move Pasternak. You're not going to move McAvoy. You're not going to move Zadorov. You just signed him. I mean, are they going to move someone like an Andrew Peak, Brandon Carlo? Or are you going to try to move someone like, I don't know, Geeky, Pavel Zacha? Again, that also makes your forward depth even worse, though, at the same time, Nick. So they don't have a lot of options. I think that's the main point that I'm trying to make. They're in a really tough spot heading into this deadline. And then honestly, heading into next year as well, because I just don't think Don Sweeney is the answer at GM right now.
They've reached a tipping point where they've just forsaken too much of the future for short-term progress, and they didn't make a lot. So We're going to take our second and final break of today's show. When we come back, we'll talk about the Blue Jackets' nice win against the Leafs and where the Blue Jackets are heading right after this. So be sure to stick around. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories of last summer was going to see Blink-182, seeing your childhood favorite bands with your best friends. It's one of those things that makes you happy to be alive. And now our friends at Gametime have made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. My friends and I were debating what I wanted to do for my birthday. We settled on getting tickets for Devils Golden Knights the day after my birthday. And with Gametime, we found a good deal and we could see the view from our seats before we got them. The super deal was particularly impressive and offered great seats at an unbeatable price. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. We are going to go fast here. We went a little long in that second segment because there was a lot to hit on, but the Blue Jackets are one of the nice stories in the league right now. They've rattled off a really nice stretch of games. They're sitting at a positive goal differential, 7-2-1 in their last 10. They're in the first wild card spot right now, and it's been a real treat to see them find a way. And it's been guys like Kirill Marchenko who's having a great season. Last night, Adam Fantilli had a hat trick against the Leafs, who somebody a lot of people very high on was having a really nice rookie season before he suffered that Achilles injury in December of last year, which is something that really was a shame because he was right there as far as the counting stats with Connor Bedard before that injury. And they were shaping up to have a very nice race between those two, Brock Faber and Luke Hughes, but instead the injuries derailed that. But the Blue Jackets are finally making what seems to be progress. And you want to give Dean Evason some credit for kind of getting that ship in the right direction. You want to give the young guys credit for taking some accountability, not even accountability, but taking some ownership of the direction of their team. You know, they did well last night. No Sean Monahan, no Cole Sillinger either. Fantilli playing center for the first time in a while. So we're going to throw it to Locked On Blue Jackets. Then we'll come back. We'll talk all about the Jackets win over the Leafs.
I got 2 words for you and 2 words only, and those words are Adam Fantilli. Locked On Blue Jackets here, Jay Foster, and Blue Jackets win big last night, breaking their 2-game losing streak, a 5-1 win over Toronto Maple Leafs, including a hat-trick from Adam Fantilli, his first career hat-trick, his first career short-handed goal, a goal and an assist from local boy Luca Del Bel Blues, an excellent night from Elvis, and the Blue Jackets have jumped back into the first wildcard spot, and the vibes were good. Everyone did just great. Thought it might get a little bit exciting. Cole Sillinger out due to injury, Denton Matejchuk out due to illness, but Blue Jackets pulled it together, and a great bounce-back performance after a really lifeless effort against the Islanders earlier this week. We're going to talk about that in more detail on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
So when you're a team like the Blue Jackets, and we said this coming into the season, when nobody expects anything from you, it can be either a good thing or it can be a bad thing. And in the case of the Blue Jackets this year, it's proven to be a good thing. And I do think that's a testament to having a coach who has a good grasp on what guys need. Because when you go into a season without expectations, it's very easy for people to start phoning it in. It is very easy for guys to feel like, well, they don't expect us to win. It's okay. Whatever happens, happens. And then the other side of that is, well, no one believes in us. Screw them. We'll go out there and do it. And right now, at least, the Jackets are on the ladder. They have pulled together a nice stretch of hockey. And it's not going to take a lot to get one of those 2 wild cards in the East right now. You look at how condensed and how tight everything is. It's going to take maybe 590, 600 points percentage hockey rest of the way to get in. That's not a lot. That's nothing special to get to 90 points.
No, again, honestly, are you even going to need 90 points in this conference? You actually might need only 86 to 88. I'm not trying to sound like an idiot here. I'm just looking at the Eastern Conference and how middling it is. You might only need 86 to around 88 points to potentially get one of those 2 wildcard spots. That's just how mid to bad the Eastern Conference is this year outside of a few teams. But this has been such a fun story to see unfold this year. Blue Jackets, after going through so much during the offseason, Nick, to see them playing like this has been awesome. And I do think if they make the playoffs, I think Dean Evason will get the Jack Adams this year for Coach of the Year. I saw a good coach in there when he was in Minnesota. Part of me feels like he didn't get that much of a fair shake with them. I feel like he kind of got fired a little too prematurely. Yes, I know Minnesota is playing very good hockey this year, people. I very much get that. But I felt like at the time when he got fired, I was like, really? Because I was like, what do you really want him to do? And I also knew at the time he was going to get hired fairly quickly because he did pretty good job with that team. You're seeing it now in Columbus. He has them playing better defensively. He has the young players developing a bit more. Marchenko, he was a healthy scratch at times last year. I remember when the Penguins played them last season and Marchenko was a healthy scratch in that last game, and all Blue Jackets fans were like, what is going on? Heck, I even was wondering what was going on because he was one of their better players. This year, he's showing that. He's been awesome. Sillinger, when he's healthy, he's been fun. Sean Monahan, when he's been healthy, he's been great to watch. Zach Werenski, Nick, how about him with the way he's playing? He has been awesome this year. Elvis had a really good game against Toronto. He's starting to turn it on a little bit more lately. This is a really fun, feel-good story, and they have a shot to get in this. My question, though, is, Nick, what do they do at the deadline? Do you just stand pat? Do you maybe reward the players with maybe a rental that's not going to cost you that much? Because remember, the Blue Jackets are building towards the future. I don't think they're going to sacrifice a first or second for a rental or anything like that, but maybe if you can sacrifice a mid-round pick to bring in a veteran player who can help you guys in the stretch run, I could see the Columbus Blue Jackets front office maybe doing that. But also at the same time, Nick, do you sell off a free agent or two that's going to be at the end of the season? That's a really interesting position for the Blue Jackets because I don't think anyone saw this coming, but I'm curious to see how they approach this deadline.
So I think there's a few answers to that. Number one, I think the month of February will dictate that. Yeah. I think if they stay in one of the two wildcard spots or close to it, I think they absolutely go out there and reaffirm and like you said, give the guys a vote of confidence and say, we appreciate what you're doing. You're doing a good job. Here's a middle six winger who's going to chip in 5 goals in the final 15 games. Thanks for what you're doing. That matters because I do think that builds, that helps foster a good relationship between the room and the organization, because guys on the team that are busting their butts game after game, it can start to get a bit draining and monotonous, and going out there, playing well, exceeding expectations, all of that stuff is supposed to get you rewarded. That's what a good team would do. Cost is not prohibitive because the Blue Jackets have a ton of cap space. They have a ton of assets to burn as well. They are in a position to make an addition or two. And the one last thing I want to get in, when I had done the math on Monday at the beginning of the week, the Senators were on pace for 93 points. The Blue Jackets were on pace for 91. If we're going to say estimated, you probably need 91. We'll say 91 to get that second wildcard spot. It might be a little bit lower than that, in all honesty. You're probably, if you're in that mix, if you're from, let's say, the Penguins up, and the Penguins are only 4 points back of that second wild card, which is crazy to say, you probably need to play 620 points percentage hockey. If you're the Penguins, if you're the Rangers, it's about 600 points percentage hockey. So 2 out of every 3-ish. And that's not asking a ton, but it is going to be a lot for teams that haven't done it all year. 3 out of 5 points of every 5 possible points. We're talking about 2.5. We're talking about 2.5 wins out of 5 games. That's not a lot to ask a team to win 2 games in regulation and 1 overtime loss out of every 5 games the rest of the way. That's not a lot.
No, it's not. But again, you've seen some of these teams start playing a bit better. The Rangers, Nick, they're actually playing a bit better, but is it too late? That's the big question we're asking ourselves. The Penguins that are 2-1 on this road trip, they have their next 4 games, Nick, against all teams either with them in the standings or lower. They have Anaheim, San Jose, Seattle, and Utah. You have an opportunity to really climb up in the standings here and get back into the race because you're playing some teams that are really not that good. It's just that, can a team like that take advantage of the schedule in front of them? The Rangers, again, they're playing well. The Flyers, they're kind of in that mix as well. Columbus, they're taking advantage of the way they're playing. I feel like just with the way the NHL's point system is, especially, it kind of rewards these types of races, even though a lot of these teams, again, are not that good. So again, be really curious to see how this next month and change goes, heading into the deadline.
So Columbus has a +3 goal differential. Yeah. Ottawa has a even goal differential. Everybody else is below even. Everybody else in the East below the second wild card has a negative goal differential right now. It is a bad conference. It is not going to take a lot to get in. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On NHL, where we ran significantly over time, but good conversation is good conversation. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Hunter and I will talk to you guys next week.